want to introduce to you a young lady. Her name is Miyako P. Jones. She was born July the 6th, 1983 at Rutherford Hospital. She grew up a very happy child. She was about 6 or 7 when she wanted to start to teach her brothers, cousins, and all the little people she know about everything she had learned in school so far. She was always just pure sunshine, very happy. She would light up a room with a beautiful smile. She always had a big heart for people that was, I would say, less fortunate. And she had a heart for the underdog, so to speak. She attended Chase High. She was well liked for her good attitude and her wonderful personality. She started teaching children's church at Mount Pisgah Church in Douglas Grove. She was a good teacher and the kids loved her. She inspired other young people to come to church, where she also sang on the choir, and a lot of her friends and family joined. All this time, God was preparing her for later in life. She was about to receive the greatest gift that God could ever give her. Kinahi, one of God's brightest stars. Sometimes she asked, did God pick the right mother for a special needs child? And I replied, you are the perfect fit, the perfect mother for Kenai. And God knew who to give him to. Miyako has always been a very good mother. And I just want to add that she was, to me, such an extraordinary person, because there's not too many people in the world can say that my child was diagnosed with autism when he was 3 years old. And I have kept every doctor's paper from day one. So anytime she has to go and take him for anything, they want to know, can you get this, can you get that? She has it all. She has every paper he has ever got from a doctor. She is very extraordinary. She's a glue to me. She helps hold the family together, so to speak. She organizes every dinner, tells you what you're going to bring, where we're going to be, how we're going to celebrate it, and how she's going to decorate it. She's a very good cook. She's my daughter, and I love her. And she is Miss Miyako Jones. I speak for this morning. Can we give her a hand, please?
Good morning, everybody. I was honored when Bishop asked me to come and speak on this month. We've been talking about mental health awareness, and now I get to tell you about autism awareness. So your question is, why autism? Well, like you know, I have an autistic child who's probably laying down right now, but he's okay. What I want y'all to know about autism is it has been an interesting road, but I've enjoyed the journey. It's been a lot of ups and a lot of downs, but God has kept me through it all. But we say, what is autism? Now, because you know about autism, I'm telling you about my child with autism. If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Because autism is unlike cerebral palsy, Down syndrome. I can't think of any more of them. But if you see somebody with Down syndrome, they all cute. They all look alike. It doesn't matter what creed they are, they all look alike. But the thing about autism, you can't tell that they have autism. Some of them may have some tics, some of them may have some things that they do, some will be loud. You just never know. You can flip it. These are some signs and behaviors of autism. And with Kinahi, in the beginning, he had problems with eye contact, but he was never a crier. I had Kinahi on Mother's Day. It was amazing. I went in labor right back there. This is when this church was Jesus Lighthouse Tabernacle. Mama had bought me the most beautiful lacy dress. I thought I was slain to the gods. They were up here singing on the praise team, and my water broke back there. I guess from the look on my face, Mama knew that something was wrong. So we got to the hospital. Kinahi was here at 1:22. We left at 12, so he was on the way. He was big when he came out, 10'14" and a quarter. He was 22 inches long. He was a big old boy. One thing I remember the nurse saying, "Uh-oh," and I was like, "No, there's no uh-ohs. What's the uh-ohs?" They didn't have a pamper big enough for him. That was the uh-oh. His fingernails was as long as mine, and he just had a look on him. Unlike other newborns, he was just looking around, looking. I remember when we went home, he was still just looking around. It didn't matter what I did to him, he didn't seem to want to be held. He wasn't a crier. I'd put him in his swing and he'd watch TV for hours. I thought I had the most amazing baby. I was like, ain't they supposed to cry or something? They don't want to be held. Kenai, he wasn't here for it. So later on, these are other terms of autism and who came up with it. Now you can flip to the last page in the pictures. There's him. So, like she said, I was at work and I got a call from the daycare. He was going to daycare where my nephew's mama ran the daycare at. And she said, "You got a minute?" And I said, "Yeah, I got a minute." She said, a city worker is a person that comes and they can, kind of say, well, your child might have this or your child might have this, but you need to have some further testing. So I picked him up that day and I cried and I went to Mom's and I told them, they said, "There's something wrong with Kenai." I was like, "What's wrong with him? He's perfect." I said, "They think it's something with him." She was like, "What?" I said, "Yeah." So they got me tangled up with some people from the National Autism Society, and they let me know that our district had to go to Asheville. And there's a place there called Asheville Teach, so I took him there, and they tested him, and he had autism. So, of course, I thought that was the worst thing in the world. I remember crying my heart out because that was my only baby. I know that I wasn't going to have no more, and he has autism. I didn't even know what autism was. You would have thought they would have said, "Oh, he's going to die tomorrow." So he was nonverbal, and he's nonverbal now. So that meant we had to figure out ways to communicate with him. And I forgot to give y'all a copy of this back here. So we used this wonderful thing called a core board. And it enables us to speak to Kenai and him to speak back. And then there's another core board that we use for extensive language, and it has his people in it that he might need to talk to and the things he need to do. People think, "Well, I heard him saying something." Yeah, he's echolalic, and that means he's repeating something that he's heard before. He does have speech in there. We're just waiting, and I got faith that he's gonna come back around. So like you see him now, he's laying down. And what he's doing is called stimming. Because you wouldn't believe it, but everybody in here has a different scent. And for a person with autism, that can be enaging sometimes, kind of irritating. So he smells every one of them scents, and he smells them so intensifies that he could have a headache. When you see his head back with his eyes closed, like this, he's stimming. That's his way of depressing, of holding it together long enough for I can be quiet so I can get out of here. He means no disrespect to you. Then sometimes he might holler out something, and I'm like, oh my God, y'all, I'm sorry. I told him to be quiet, but King Kenai does what King Kenai does. So that's my small tidbit on autism. Now I'm going to tell you where my faith has brought me to this spot. Okay, hold your pickles. So a couple years ago, my nephew, he's not here because he's playing travel ball. He decided that he wanted to ride a bike. And I was like, okay, get a bike. So Kenai, he showed interest in riding the bicycle. Me being mom of the year, I went and got Kenai a bike. Blue bike, cruiser, nice, all the bells and whistles. So Kenai learned to ride the bicycle. Even their great-grandma showed them that she could ride a bicycle, because she's awesome. So Kenai learned to ride the bicycle, and he was doing good. And in our yard, it has like a downhill slope. So somehow, Kenai decided that he was going to go to the backyard and ride his bicycle. I was in the house. You know, it was a day. Everybody was probably there. Kenai rode the bicycle down, and he lost control. He hit a tree head on. That gave him a concussion. So I called the doctors. They told me, oh yeah, you know, it's all right. Check his eyes. Took him to the doctor. Yeah, he got a concussion. My sister said, Kenai hit that tree hard. 2 days passed. I went to get Kenai up for school. It was like the end of his freshman year, I think. When I picked him up, he was lifeless, y'all. I was like, oh my God. So I screamed immediately. Kiana came running. When we got him up, it was a blank stare. My heart dropped. I couldn't breathe. I was trying to hold it together, and Kiana was saying, well, let's just get him up. So when we tried to stand him up, he went down. I looked at Kiana, I was like, what's happened? He was drooling. We had to physically get him up and carry him to the bathroom. So I called the doctors again. Yeah, that happens in some kids, you know, with concussions. They can be rough. Give him a couple of days. So a couple of days came past, and he did stop drooling, and he did come back, but he didn't come back. He had a blank stare. And I was like, oh God, Mama of the Year, you did this. You bought him that bicycle, it's your fault. Immediately, of course, I was just a mess. Ken was like, you could have never known that he was gonna hit that tree. It's gonna be all right. So the doctor's office wasn't doing anything. I took him back one more time. And at the end of the conversation, I was wanting him to, you know, maybe change his medicine around to help. He looked me in my face and said, I don't know that much about autism. A whole month has passed, and I'm trusting you as his doctor, and now you tell me you don't know nothing about autism. So I alerted everybody I know that prayed and that could reach him faster than I could, just saying. And I called around, and I found the doctor that knows about autism. She said, bring him. So when I bring him, they checked him. She said, well, you know, autism and concussions don't go well together. And I was like, I know this. So we found out that he had a brain bleed on top of that concussion. So we went to the neurologist, And the neurologist said, well, Mama, you did the right thing. He said, there's nothing that can be done about it. He said, the skull has healed, now the brain has to heal. He said, but, for the hallucinations, because he was seeing stuff, hearing stuff, and we was like, who are you talking to? One night we thought we was going to have to leave him in that house because he was out there. And I was like, who's he talking to? Who's he talking to? So after a little while, he still was doing the same thing. So they was like, well, maybe y'all should see a psychiatrist. And I was like, I already see one. Are you crazy? So we took him, and the psychiatrist seen him. And she looked at me and she said, he's in cytosis. And I was like, okay, good for him. What's that? Cytosis mean he's moving in and out of consciousness. It's like he's moving in and out of our world to wherever he is in his brain. She alerted me, this was like 1 o'clock in the day. She alerted me that I needed to take him to Gastonia Hospital immediately and have him admitted into the children's psych ward. I broke. I was hysterical. Every being in me, it just left my body. I bet you I screamed for a good 30 minutes. Then I finally got it together, long enough to call my mom and daddy and tell her that I needed to take Kinahi to the psych ward because they wanted him to be admitted, and I wasn't going to be able to stay with him. So that didn't sit well. So I was, like I said, I was hysterical. They had to come and check on me. I told God, fix it, please. I can't. So finally, my brother, who I love, he helped me see the voice of reason. He said, this is what needs to be done. He needs the help. You did everything you can. It'll be all right. So I called my super moms, my Aunt Sonia and my mama, about 10 o'clock. And I finally was able to move my feet to the car to take him to Gastonia. So we got there, and it was like 30 police there, and I was like, what are they doing? And when I told them my name, they followed us, and I was like, I ain't no criminal, what's up? And then the nurse told me, she said, it's just, precautions. Some people that come in are actually, So they searched me, and they searched him. And he was looking at me like, why this dude all over me? I was like, I don't know. So they was like, we need you to take off all your jewelry. And I was like, what? So I took off all my jewelry. I said, we need you to take his off. So I took his off. And the nurse said, you're gonna have to leave him right here because we need you to put your pocketbook up. And I was like, okay. So when I left him right there, while I was going, I've got an anklet on my leg that I've had since he's been in the world. And it makes a little bell noise. But I stumped the whole time I was going. So he would know, I'm on my way going, I'm coming back. So when we got down there, they let the nurse know, hey, can you get her back fast? He's a little antsy. So when I got back, it was a female cop. She was playing with him. And when he seen me, he came and hugged me. And I was like, what'd they do to you? So then they said, well, the doctor's ready for you. So they took me through some doors. I don't know if anybody's ever been to jail. I'm not saying that I have or I haven't, but that's not what we're here to talk about. But it's one of the loudest clicks you'll ever hear in your life. So we went through 3 doors, and it sounded like, I don't know, it was like I felt the tears rolling. And I was trying to hold it together because I know that if I started crying, he was gonna know something was wrong. So we got to the last door, and they said, we need you to help him get undressed. So I got him undressed, and the tears started rolling. And I remember he wiped a tear off my face, and the lady said, okay, well, he's gonna go this way, and you're gonna go back out front. I just fell apart right there. And I said, God, please, I can't leave him down here. So I was right there in the little nurse's station, and the lady was helping me. She said, come on. She said, don't look back. And I was like, in my family, we always look back. She said, if you look back, it's gonna make it harder. I said, nothing could be harder. So I looked back, and he wasn't there. It was a big room, and he had enough room to walk around. And I was just frantically crying, and this shift changed, so it's people coming in and out. And I'm praying and crying, and a man steps out, spooky looking man. I thought he was the janitor. He was like, hey, Miss Jones, I'm your, he said, I'm gonna be evaluating Kinahi. And he said, where are you going? They told me I had to go back out front. He said, no. He said, you can sit right here in this little cubicle. He said, that way you can see him and you can see her. And the nurse said, well, they told us that. He said, what did I say? So I stood there, and I was like, right here. He was like, yeah. He said, I've been watching y'all since y'all came in. He said, so you just sit right here. So I got down on my knees, and I prayed, and I cried, and I think the louder I cried, the people was walking by saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And the nurse came back and said, it's gonna be another hour. By now, it's like 11:30, and I'm saying, okay, God, if this is what you want me to do, I will somehow pick myself up, and I will go out and leave him. So the psychiatrist came back out. He said, I want you to go out and get some air. And I was like, are you telling me to go home? He said, no, don't go home. He said, I'm just telling you to go out and get some air. So I went out there. Thank you, Uncle. I went out there and I told him, I said, it's taking him forever. I said, but I think I'm about ready to leave him, if that's what they say. Auntie said, well, you don't know yet. She said, just give him a minute. You don't know yet. I said, I'm going to have to leave him. The thing I read, it said 20 to 10 days, and I was like, oh, God, what am I going to do for 20 days? I'm going to be in Gastonia right here. So I went back in the inside, and the nurse said, well, they've locked the doors, so you can't go back in. So I was sitting out there in the waiting room with everybody else, and I was crying and praying, and little old lady came down. She said, what's wrong, Puddin'? I said, so much. I said, just so much. She said, do you have faith? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, okay, don't worry about it. So in a few minutes, I heard my name called over the loudspeaker, and I was like, is that you, Lord? And so me still crying, and everybody handing me tissue, because, I mean, it's a big hospital. It's quiet now, because I'm just boo-hooing, sobbing loudly. So I went back through the doors, and I sat down, and the psychiatrist came out. He said, how you doing? I said, I'm not doing good. I said, where's he gonna be so I know where to go? He started laughing. He said, listen, he said, I've seen a lot of kids. He said, but I don't believe that yours is harmful to himself or anybody. And I said, okay, I don't believe it either. He said, you've done everything you could. He said, you've done more than most people would have thought to do. He said, he told the girl, he said, open the doors. He opened these doors. He's giving Mama her baby. I was all over him, crying, thanking God. He said, there's no way I could have took this baby from you tonight. He said, because him, after you leave him, is going to be so more uncontrollable than you have been this whole time. He said, because as I was watching him, I was watching you. She said, I seen you. He said, he's going to do a whole lot better at home with you than he's going to do here with him. He said, I want to see y'all back in 3 months. He said, but don't stop doing what you're doing. He said, don't stop doing what you're doing. I said, I try to be a mama, a good mama. I feed him. He said, don't stop praying. He said, keep praying. He said, 'cause sometimes prayers go farther than medicine. Sometimes prayers go farther than medicine. So they still hadn't unlocked the last door. because Kinahi, in Kinahi fashion, was fascinated with the nurse's glittery badge. But when he heard me, he came around and he looked at me and he wiped my tears and he kissed my nose. They already had him dressed. He had chips and a drink and he stood there. And I was looking like, what is it? And he held his hand out because he know I always hold his hand. They gave us our discharge papers, and I swear I heard them hollering when I walked out the hospital room. But when I tell y'all, from that day on, that made my faith, because I know if he can move that mountain for me, he can move it for anybody. If he can move that mountain for me, he can move it for anybody. And another thing, as in mental health, it's okay. After all of this, I had to go see a doctor because I needed something. I needed help because I was going through some things, and my sister was like, listen, they was like, you got to get it together. My sisters, both of them are here. Stand up, sisters. Come on. My support system, my team, my daddy. That's my prayer team. Sister Chris, my Jack, my bishop, my first lady. So I told my doctor, I said, so my son has autism. And she was like, really, how old is he? I was like, he's about 14. She was like, oh, wow. How's that working? I said, well, I think I'm crazy. I don't sleep good. I can't focus. My anxiety is doubled. She was like, well, let's think about getting you on something. And I was one of these people that thought, well, I'm praying. I shouldn't be going through all this. But in the same sense, something said, well, I put these people here for you to have help. Take the help. So after being medicated myself, I'm better. I'm better. And that's the end. And that's my ministry, till every piece fits. Thank y'all so much.
To God be the glory. As everyone always know what one of my favorite words is, but God. But God. God said that he wouldn't put no more on us than we could bear. Then he said, cast all your cares upon him, for he cares for us. Thank you, Miyako. But God.
He's a professor at Gardner-Webb University, specializes in pastoral care and counseling. He is also a licensed pastoral care and counselor. We are blessed to have him in our presence. He's by way of Relton County, Tennessee, and Texas, and all over the place. We are honored to have this gift in the house to speak to us, however he wants to speak to us, because he blessed us 2 weeks ago with his message about going to the other side. Bless you, Dr. Dickens. Amen. You up, sir. We love you. Bless you.
Well, I said to you before, you know what it means when a preacher looks at his watch? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I just wanted to know what time it was. I also want you to know that I've been driving, even though I was here 2 weeks ago, I've been driving around out here trusting Siri. I think that Siri and I have had a broken love relationship. she was sending me to some far-off place, and I finally said, I've been by this area before. You know, let's just stop, and instead of trusting Siri, Mark, I went back to your text message and said, just go to this address on the old radio WGA whatever highway, and I got here. Please be seated. I want to remind you of a couple of things. The first one being, and I didn't bring it this morning, I want to remind you of that towel I brought 2 Sundays ago that said Arkansas State Hospital. One of the great treasures in my life that belonged to my mother when I was a teenager, twice she was taken from my family with no explanation, just, well, she's crazy or she's gone to the nut house. But out of those painful experiences, God placed in my heart a desire, number one, to understand this whole spectrum of what we call mental illness and mental disease. It's even a horrible title in a way. Everybody has diseases. I mean, just think of the word disease. Dis-ease. I'm not at ease. And there are so many different kinds of emotional and mental struggles that, quite frankly, so many fall into the category of spiritual struggles. So, when I read to you last week the story that I want to come back to in Mark chapter 5, I want to revisit Legion again. Not only is he many, but we are many. In Mark chapter 5, but before I get there, I want to say to you, I was thinking about my drive to get here. And I'm thinking, my wife says to me, one day she said I was possessed of a demonic spirit that couldn't understand directions, couldn't read a map. She says, whatever's got a hold of you, and there's some truth to that. I mean, I wondered, I've driven around here. You know, I knew that big company's up over here, and I knew where Hudlow Road is, and I've been here twice. I mean, once just to drive by and find it. But Siri, she beguiled me. Turn this way. It was a little like, I mean, not that I was there, but it was a little like being in the Garden of Eden, and God had said, "You look at all of this I'm giving you, but now this tree right here, the fruit of the tree in the midst of the garden here, don't eat of it, or you'll surely die." And along comes the serpent. And he sees Eve and he says, "Say, haven't I seen you before? So beautiful." She says, "Get away from me. Get away from me." He says, "Say, look, I don't want to hurt you. Look at this beautiful tree." Yes, but God said if we messed around with that tree and ate of the fruit of the tree, we would surely die. God said you would surely die. No. God was teasing. Look at it. It's good for the eyes. Touch it. It's so smooth. And before you know it, He is good. He is pretty. That old serpent. Remember, this is just a story. The serpent slithers off, and if a snake could smile, he was smiling. We got her. And we got him. It's just a story. Well, Siri was the snake for me this morning. She kept saying, go this way. Before long, she'd had me in Forest City, Arkansas. Well, I took you to the right Forest City. No, you didn't. But anyway, I got to thinking, how am I going to find this place? The answer is, look for the church. You know Ann Weems, that wonderful writer, that African-American woman who tells stories and sometimes is a little irreverent, but she tells spiritual stories that get our attention. And one story she told one day was a little 6-year-old girl who lived in New York City in one of the boroughs and decided to wander around thinking she could find her way to her school. But she got lost. She got so very lost. I don't know if you've ever been really lost before. I don't remember if you were a child and ever got lost. I wasn't a child. I've been lost in some of the great cities of the world. I've been lost in what I call the bowels of Bangkok, Thailand, just way back where you'd almost have to have an elephant to get out. I've been lost in Bangalore, India. I was scared to death for 2 weeks. Oh, I thought I was getting a message. Are you saying, hurry up? Hurry up? We got an hour and a half, don't we? So anyway, I remember I was so afraid for the first 2 times I went to do ministry in Moscow at the medical university. I finally learned to just get a card from the hotel, something with the address on it, because I didn't speak any Russian at the time and I knew they could get me back. But I just got so lost. Well, this little 6-year-old girl was lost. And finally a policeman noticed that she seemed to be crying and she seemed to be distraught. And he goes to her and he says, little girl, I'm a policeman. May I help you? And she says, yes, sir. I don't know where I am. He said, well, I know right where you are, I can tell you. She said, but I don't know how to get home again. And he says, well, where is home? And she said, we've just moved. I can't remember the address. And he said, well, do you know the area? And she said, yes, it's somewhere back in here. And he said, well, get in my car and we'll drive around until we see your house. And so she got into the car and the police officer drove her around. Let's assume it was a very nice woman police officer who drove her around and they were looking for houses. Everything looked the same to this little 6-year-old. And finally the little girl says, stop right here. She said, why? Is this your house? She said, no, but that's my church. And if you can get me to my church, the church can help me find my way back home. I believe that with all my heart. It's all that keeps me coming back to folks like you and me, that some days I say we're the greatest in the world, and other days I say, why in the world do they mess with me and I mess with them? We're all so dadgum human, so foible. We're all so broken. And sometimes we act like, and I think a great temptation maybe even of a congregation like yours is when we're trying to do something special and different for people that we know are special and need help. Sometimes we can get a little cocky and proud for, look what we're doing. And we all need to remind ourselves as church that sometimes if it weren't for the church of the living God, we'd all still be lost. We'd be as lost as anybody else is and couldn't find our way. So, anyway, back to my story. I said last week, I want to talk about that lighthouse for a minute. Let me read my text first, and then I'll go to the lighthouse if I can find, if Siri hasn't gotten mad at me, really mad at me, because there's something in particular I'm looking for. There it is. The text. Remember we talked about the other side last time. Who are the people on the other side? What does it mean to go to the other side? You go to the other side, that phrase, it's an innocent phrase. You go to the other side and you find this man wandering in a cemetery, broken and emotions unchained and a spirit of shame and anger. So, here's the story again. They came to the other side, and it's in Mark chapter 5. They came to the other side. There's always another side. There's another side to a story. There's another side to a broken marriage. There's another side to a church fight. There's another side to a disagreement. There's another side to an idea. There's always another side. We get so focused on what we think is the only right way. There's always another side, another place. So they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had come out of the boat, there met him a man of the tombs. It didn't say he met the man. He said the man met him out of the tombs, a man with an unclean spirit. I want to go back all the way to remind you just briefly last week that I am not equating mental illness and mental deficiencies and mental distress and emotional breakdowns. I am not equating it with demon possession. And if Jesus were standing here before, he would say, let me tell you how I mean that, using the language of their day. But they met him here. They met him, a man with an unclean spirit who lived among the tombs. My thinking is his illness. My thinking is what drove him back to the tombs, Pastor Mark, was his unfinished grief. My guess is there'd been people die in his family that he loved. There'd been people he cared for taking from them. The Romans were bad about just picking up some people, hanging them on a cross on the side of the road and saying, we want to show you who's in control. My guess is, who was it? A mama, a daddy, a brother, a sister, a son, maybe all. My guess is something connected to the concept of cemetery, of death, and of grief kept bringing him back to the cemetery. I will tell you that I have known and pastored and been one of those people in my church. How many times when my first wife died did I find myself as if my car was on autopilot, just going back to the graveside and talking to her? Now I don't go as far to talk to her. I just talk to her in the house or wherever as if she was there. I try not to let my current wife know that I'm talking to my first wife, but I talk to her. So here's this man. He lived among the tombs. No one could bind him with even a chain. He'd often been bound with fetters and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart and the fetters he broke in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. It's like trying to get a hold of someone whose mind has been so blown on chemicals that the adrenaline and the energy and the straight thinking gets taken. Good people, but there are bad things that can happen in the brains of good people. Nobody had strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out, bruising, cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshiped him. Sometimes when we don't even know what it's all about, something in our heart says we need to bend the knee and bow the heart, even when we don't understand why. And so he worshiped him, and crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he'd said to him, Jesus had, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Jesus didn't have to shout at uncleanliness and disease. Jesus had spoke to him, said, "What's your name?" And he responded, "My name is Legion, for we're many. There are many voices inside of me." And he begged him eagerly, "Please," they said, "don't send us out into the country, into that herd of pigs." And I won't go back through my flying pig story again, swine flu, except to say what happened is, in a moment, he was whole. Sometimes it takes medication, and sometimes we have to work a long time with the right kind of medication. Always it takes friends and support and patience. Overcoming any embarrassment we have that our loved one may or may not be like someone else. But here we have Jesus speaking words that bring healing. And the herdsman fled, and we know what happened. The demons there ran into the pigs, and the pigs ran into the sea, and then there's more to the story. Well, we talked last week about who are these people on the other side. You don't have to have some form of mental challenge to need help. You know, I told you last week, why did I go get a BS in psychology? Everybody knows what BS means. We don't say it in church. Then I get an MS, more of the same. And then I get a PhD, which just means piled higher and deeper. Why did I go do that? Because even when I was a little boy coming out of a home with a father, metaphorically speaking, who is overtaken by demon run, his best friends, Jack Daniels, I.W. Harper, and Jim Beam, they'd have their meetings together. And that, and my mother, whom I think, bear in mind, when I say the word crazy, it's somebody using the word that believes it applies to him, but it's just a silly word we create that means nothing. I don't believe in craziness. I really don't. I just believe there's kind of crazy behavior sometimes. Doesn't make sense. But why did I do this? Because I knew something in me wanted to be well, wanted to be more whole. But mental dis-ease and being, say, on a spectrum disorder with autism, or wrestling with, so what if the issue was grief? What does it take to drive us to the point of craziness? Sometimes it's alcohol or drugs, or sometimes it's things that happen in our brain that we don't have any control over. It's just things that happen up here. And we just need help. But back to this lighthouse. Here's my story. I remembered it from an old textbook. And I'm just going to read it to you because it speaks well. I think the story was told and written by a man who used to be the pastor of the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. He says, on a dangerous seacoast where ships often occurred, and there was once a crude little life-saving station. It was just a hut. There was only one little boat, only one, but the few devoted members kept a constant watch over the sea with no thought for themselves. They went out day or night, tirelessly searching for the lost. So many lives were saved by this little station that it became famous. Some of them who were saved and others wanted to be associated with the station and to give of their time and money to support its work. So new boats were bought and new crews were trained. The little life-saving station grew. Some of the new members were unhappy with the crude building. It's just an old tent building, just, off on the side of the road. Some of them were unhappy with the crude building. They felt the rescued needed a more comfortable place as the first place to come when they're pulled out of the water. So the building was enlarged with nicer furniture. It became now a life-saving station, a popular gathering place. It was redecorated beautifully, furnished almost like a club. Less of the members were now interested in going to the sea on life-saving missions. So they hired lifeboat crews to come in and do the work. They called them oarsmen, bishops, apostles, pastors. We'll hire them. They'll come in. We'll pay them. They'll do the work. And they hired crews that would work. About this time, a large ship was wrecked off the coast, and hired crews brought in boatloads of cold, wet, half-drowned people. They were dirty and sick, and some of them had black skin, and some spoke a strange language, and the beautiful new club was considerably messed up. At the next meeting, there was a split in the club membership. Most of the members wanted to stop the club life-saving activities. It was so unpleasant and a hindrance to the normal pattern of being the club. But some members insisted that life-saving was their primary purpose. They pointed out that they were still called a life-saving station. They were finally voted down and told that if they wanted to save the lives of everybody and all kinds of people, regardless of their problems, who were shipwrecked in these waters, well, they could just begin their own life-saving station somewhere. After all, we've got this nice clubhouse, and we have officers and meetings. So they did. They built another life-saving station down the road. But the same thing happened to them. If you visit the seacoast today, you will find a number of exclusive clubs along that shore. Shipwrecks are still frequent in those waters, only now most of the people drown. I thank God for the lighthouse. So what about those that go out into the boats and go? How do we deal with these people? I'm going to tell you what you already know. Please forgive me for that, but I'm a preacher. I'm a slow learner, so if I say it several times, I might get it. First, if we want to be lifesavers, And it really doesn't matter. Look, it doesn't matter to Jesus the color of a skin, the diagnosis of an illness. It doesn't matter to Jesus the gender. We're fighting about all kinds of things, making it political. People are people are people. And they're hurting. And so here's what we do. And this sounds easy. It's obvious. First, why don't we go to the people where they are? Jesus says over there, I think I'll go to the other side. Don't know who those people are on the other side. They may not look like me. They may not sound like me. They may not be as straight as me. They may not be as religious as me. But I think I'll go see who they are. And so Jesus goes over there, and what he found, I mean, there's always someone in need on the other side. Because not only, as I said before, are we, the people on the other side, we live on the other side. You got to go where they are. You cannot expect, just because you open the doors to a church and say, we welcome you, you cannot expect that will do it. I know great cathedrals that open their doors and welcome people. And they don't come by the droves. So if they're not coming to us, we go to them. We've changed the Great Commission. The Great Commission of Jesus was, as you're going into all the world, make disciples. We've changed go and tell to come and hear. It's a reversal of the Great Commission. If we want to be ministering to people on the other side, we have to go where they are. And this is an interesting story here, because you remember Jesus climbed into that boat. I mean, he'd already been on the other side, done some other wonderful miracles if you read in Mark chapter 4. But in chapter 5, Jesus gets into that boat, and all of a sudden they're so happy to see him. And what does he do? After he gets through with their glad handing him, he wraps up some rags and gets under the stern. The New Testament language says it. It says he made a pillow and went to sleep. It's what the language says. He pillowed himself under the stern and went to sleep. And of course, here comes this great storm. You know, Master, the tempest is raging, the billows are tossing high. The sky is o'ershadowed with blackness, no shelter or help is nigh. Carest thou not that we perish? How canst thou lie asleep when each moment so madly is threatening our grave in the lonely deep? But the winds and the waves shall obey my will. Peace be still, peace be still. Whether the wrath of a far-off sea, or demons or men, or whatever may be, no water can swallow this ship where lies, sleeping on a pillow, the master of ocean and earth and sky. They all shall sweetly obey my will. Peace be still, peace be still. Going where they are will get you through some storms. It'll take you into some places where you got white caps and tombstones. And it'll take you to the edge of a cliff where somebody's herd of pigs is running off, and they're going to blame that on you. To go and commit oneself to caring is not an easy task. It's easier just to split off and go start another lighthouse. We're old now. What can we do? And I thank God for the lighthouse. Is that who we are? Go where they are. Listen to their stories. Mental illness. We create categories to try to understand what's going on. We have gastrointestinal illnesses. We have cardiovascular diseases. We have skin and skeletal diseases. And we have mental, sometimes the brain, diseases that are should be no more judged than my having diabetes or a heart blockage. So how do I listen to their stories? It's a fascinating thing. In this here, in the culture of that day, when Jesus said, when anybody said, tell me your name. Because to give someone your name was to tell them something about you. It's to say, I'm willing to relate to you not this way, this way. I go to my doctor, Dr. Mel Praxis, and sometimes I feel like Mel wants to relate to me this way. I mean, Mel's, last time I went to see him, he said, I don't know what to think about this. He scratched his head and goes back and looks at some books and come back. He said, I think I got it. I said, okay, what have I got? He said, well, have you ever had this before? And I said, yeah, I had it before. He said, well, best I can tell you, you got it again. That's my doctor. Well, relating to people, if you're going to people on the other side, listen, this way doesn't work. We're the good people helping you. We're saving you. We're the ones on the lighthouse. Come on in and work. Be careful if you sit in that chair. You don't want to make it dirty. Hold that child down over there, please. That child's making too much racket. So when we get to know their names, we're saying, can we connect with each other on this level? The heart. Here's why I'm a Christian. It's not just the cross. It's not the empty tomb. It's the fact that in John, the Word became flesh. God said, I'm tired of just thinking ideas about what people ought to believe. I want to send my Son down there and let them see what it's like. Here's what it's like really to be human. And the book says about Jesus, he was tempted and he was tested at every place like we are. That word tempted, that word tested that's used there in the New Testament, you may or may not remember it. It's the Greek word from which we get pyrex. It's parazo. It means you can put this dish in the fire and it's not going to break. It says of the Lord Jesus, when God said, he left everything to come down to show us what it was like to be human. Lonely, fearful, they even killed him. But he also came for God to say, I'm going to show you in my boy that I got more power than just that. So Jesus says to him, what's your name? And he says, my name is Legion, we're many. And in the giving of the name, he tells the story. Sometimes, Pastor Mark, one reason I ask students, just tell me your name. Tell me about you. And I say, here's my name. It always amazes me. People ask sometimes, you fill out a form, says your name, and I see somebody write Dr. Doug Dickens, and I think, really, were they named Doctor? Their mother had a funny sense of humor, I guess, just named them Doctor. My name's Doug Dickens. Doctor was added to my name. It's not really part of my name. And so Jesus cuts through all of that and says, tell me your name. And he says, my name is Legion. Here's what's going on inside of me. We must listen to the stories. And the stories that churches like you and I belong to, the lighthouse type churches, we got to hear the real stories. And we're not very good in our churches about telling our real stories. You know, when my alcoholic father hits the bottle after he's been sober for 9 months or a year, it's pretty shameful for him to come back to church and say, I fell off the wagon. Or to be judged by somebody else that he was drinking with that Friday night that he sees in church on Sunday morning. Our stories are just our stories. And so when we listen to our stories, here's a sad truth that almost every pastor knows. Sadly, many churches are the last place in the world where we can go and be honest about our brokenness, sinfulness. And sin, we got some that religious. We have sin if it's just something about moral categories. It's not what it means at all. Sin was an archer's term. You know, you put the arrow in the bow and draw it up and someone says, you sin to the right. You sin to the left. You sin to my left. No, you hit it right on the spot. You did. He sinned. He should have been sitting over there with you. Now, but sin means to miss the mark. It's not just an archer's term. The athlete shoots, and they say, oh, bounced off the rim. To sin means it doesn't hit the mark. Sin's not always a sign of a moral failure. There is no moral failure in having a form of mental illness, of being on the spectrum. There's no sin. It's just there's a brokenness there. And we have to listen to the brokenness. If I listen to your story, I would hope that we could build enough of an honest relationship that you could tell me, oh, man, Doug, I screwed up at this point, and here's some things that happened. I'm doing the best I can. And, you know, so Jesus says, what's your name? Listen to the story, and everybody's story is different, and everybody's story is sacred. Let me tell you, I got about 4 things here that I'd want to mention. All I say again, you know. Don't assume or even be intimidated by how people who are hurting treat you. You go to listen to your story and you ask his name, and he's swinging and saying, get away from me, or I don't want to see the preacher, or this is not a good time, or get out of my house, or blankety blank. And what's behind all of that? Don't assume that we know their stories, and don't be intimidated when they start responding to us. What do you want to do with us, Jesus? Get out of here. It was a common form of saying, I feel threatened. Don't mess with me, God. The kind of persons, not just you. You know, I know there are a lot of churches in this world that are intentional about working with all kinds of brokenness. There are churches that specialize in just inviting alcoholics and addicts to be part of their fellowship. Not everybody feels they can be a part of that church. There are churches that are filled with people who've been in and out of prison, and the church says, but that's our ministry. It's a hard ministry, but we'll do it. It is a wonderful thing you do to say, we want to be the church here. Don't assume if they don't come that they don't want you. And don't be intimidated. Don't assume that the way they respond to you is not comfortable, not what you want to hear. When people are hurting, and we all know the cliche, hurt people hurt people. So I've got to finish this because I'm aware in about 15, 20 minutes I got to pick up youngins from another church. Or maybe I'll just leave them wandering for a while. Well, I've said go to where they are. Don't wait for them to come to you. I've said listen to their stories. I've said don't assume or be intimidated by what they tell you. I'm thinking right now of a story of a pastor friend of mine. He had a very wealthy family in his church. The husband was not a Christian, very active, prominent businessman in the community. Several times the pastor would go by to visit, just to sit and visit with him, would share the good news about Jesus with him, and the pastor would say, or the man would say, Pastor, not right now. And one day the pastor decided to go anyway. He was sharing, and when he finished, the man did nothing but just sit there and stare at him. Wealthy man, leader in the community. The pastor's here and he's ignoring the pastor. He just stares at him. The pastor's uncomfortable, so finally he gets up and excuses himself, says, thank you for letting me one more time share the gospel, and he leaves. And he goes out to his car and he's thinking, I might have really offended him. He was just, his silence, he just ignored me. He ignored me. Pastor works up his courage to go back, take the elevator up, ring the bell. The wife lets him in and says, what happened a while ago when you were visiting John? He said, I don't know. I decided I needed to come back to see. She said, he's been sitting in his study crying ever since you left. And so the pastor goes in with the assumption, I have offended him and hurt him, and he's angry with me, and I'll never have another chance. The pastor makes an assumption about the man's behavior, and he goes in and sits down, and in a quiet moment, the man says to him, I'm sorry I couldn't respond to you. He said, for the first time, I heard and felt the goodness of what you were trying to tell me about Jesus dying for me. I heard the gospel, and I wanted to be saved. I wanted to be changed. I wanted to have what you were talking about, but I was so overwhelmed. I didn't know what to say. And the pastor thought to himself, I was so concerned about my being overwhelmed with what he might be thinking and feeling that I assumed he wasn't interested and receptive at all in the kind of care we offered. Y'all have been doing what you're doing as a church intentionally. And I got to say to you, I think, let me make this make sense. I'm trying to make the word glad here, go, the G in go, and L, listen to them, and A, avoid assumptions about what they're saying or doing in order to understand them. The D, it's not very religious. Do what you have to do as lifesavers and great commissioners. Do what you have to do to keep pulling these people out of the waters. I was sinking deep in sin, far from a peaceful shore, very deeply stained within, sinking to rise no more. But the master of the sea heard my despairing cry. From the waters lifted me, now safe am I. How do you do that? How do you keep doing it? Love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me. All right, it's time for me to go, but I'm going to tell you one more story, Mark, because you might not ever invite me back here again. My twin brother was a pastor for many years in Manila, Philippines, and was a professor. And he told me one day, he'd been there a long time, he said, I want to tell you about a man. He's not related to us, though he carries our mother's last name. The man's name was Thomas Parker. Thomas Parker had been online and established a friendship, a girlfriend, with a Filipino woman. And Thomas Parker was not a wealthy man, but he saved up his money, and he said to his girlfriend, I'd give anything someday if I could just come meet you and tell you about Jesus. So let me tell you about the Jesus I know that loves and cares for people wherever they are. So he saved his money, and he went. And he stayed, and he rented a hotel, and he visited with this young woman, would take her to supper. Dean said he, so far as he knew, was a perfect gentleman. And then Dean said, one evening I got a call from one of the physicians in my church. Mr. Parker had come to church with his girlfriend, and the doctor said, Mr. Parker had a cardiac arrest last night and has died. And we are trying to figure out what to do with his body. And Dean said, well, let me look. I'll see what we can do to help her and his girlfriend. Well, the cardiologist said, well, Dean, there's something else I want to tell you. He said, overnight, we did an autopsy on this man's body. And he said, Mr. Parker was not a healthy man. When Mr. Parker came over here, he had been warned by his doctor that this trip would probably kill him. He was diabetic. He had all kinds of health issues. In fact, he said, I found the name of his doctor in the United States and called his doctor to tell him what happened. And his doctor said to this doctor friend, he said, Mr. Parker came to the Philippines to die. He knew he was dying, but everything in him said, I want this friend I have never met to know the love and care of God in Jesus. And I'm willing to give my life to see that she does. Those words that Dean told me, the doctor said to Dean's doctor friend in the church. Mr. Parker came to the Philippines not for a vacation. He came to die telling someone about Jesus. Is that not what it is that we are about, brothers and sisters, as we care for those in this world who are different and yet like us, who live on the other side and live on this side? Go to them, listen to them, assume nothing, and do everything you can, including Not just bringing them here or taking something to them. Lobby your legislatures. Make political people aware of the needs of the homeless and the ill. Thank you for being the lighthouse here that says, whosoever will may come. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Dickens. Would you like to pray for us?
Sure, I will. Is that it?
Okay.
He's going to talk after me, but I'm going to pray the benediction. One of the oldest benedictions in the history of the church and of Judaism. I remember when a clinical psychologist, later a friend of mine, wrote a book, and the last chapter was entitled The Pastoral Benediction. And he said, pastors, don't make your prayers all sound the same, but when you pray the benediction, he said, like Aaron, the brother of Moses, the great high priest, when Aaron raised his hands over the people, and I can't do that Spocky thing, you know. If I could, that could be the Hebrew letter shalom for peace. But the priest raised his hands over the people, and I raise mine over you, and say, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to smile upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his face, his countenance upon you. And whether you're coming in or going out, may the God of all gods, who calls you his loved son and daughter, give you peace. Amen and amen.
And thank you, Dr. Dickens. Amen. We have truly been blessed as he has given our benediction. I'm going to give some final words. Thank you. Can we just give him another hand? Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for sharing and giving us exactly what we needed. Giving us exactly what we needed. Spiritually, clinically, and practically. Thank you for doing everything and just being who you are. You're a blessing, and we honor you, and we thank God for you. You are a general. You are seasoned in the word. Thank you, Miyako. Your story, it ministered to us. Amen. She talked about prayer and medication. Thank you for just having the courage to let us all know the faith walk that you have, your pilgrimage, and letting us know that God built you, he got you right, he created you for this journey. Only you can handle and do what you do. Thank God for a praying mother. That's encouraging to all of us fathers and mothers. Prayer, no matter how bad it looks, prayer turns things around.